Hey everybody, we're the Epistemologers here, and today we are talking about evidence and facts, and a little bit about debating people on Twitter. It's something I've been having a lot of fun with lately. I think we both have had on and off Twitter battles, and it's a lot of fun if you know what you're doing.
We find troll nests.
Well, I've been kicking troll nests. Yeah, we've been kicking troll nests a lot lately. So, one of the interesting things that happens is people will ask for evidence. And this is a trap, because evidence is not... If you provide them evidence, if you say, here's some evidence that backs my thought, one of a few things will happen. First, what more often than not happens is they find some way to say that evidence is either not relevant or insubstantial. So they're the arbiters of evidence. So of course they're just going to reject the evidence and say that's not evidence. That's not actually evidence, even though it is. Right? They're not going to change their point, so why would they ever accept evidence put before them? The second thing that happens a lot is that they will then, because you have provided evidence, they're not going to refer to it, so they're never going to, they're going to continue to make the same mistakes. So evidence doesn't really help in these situations. And
right? Yeah.
And so what do we do? How do you combat evidence-based reasoning?
In an online argument.
Yeah, in an online argument.
In that space. Well, honestly, we have different styles. I think you and I.
It's true.
I try not to go down that road because it's always just asking for more.
Right.
It's because of the trap.
It is a trap.
Munchausen trilemma.
Well, it's not a trap.
It's what grounds do you have for thinking this? What is your proof?
Yeah, I don't think
the trap.
It's a trap because of the trilemma per se. It's more a trap because the person you're trying to debate against is ultimately going to end up claiming the arbiter of whether that evidence is correct. Yes. And so that's
because ultimately they're just trying to win the argument.
Right.
And so there's no evidence that could not be reinterpreted.
Yes.
Arbitrarily.
You could have a photo of the guy, beating another guy, and they would say, well, where's the video? The photos can be doctored. This could possibly be something else, right? Where's the video?
What I do is I just focus on focus on contradictions. If I ever see them making some kind of logical contradiction,
yes,
I will spell it out.
Yeah, and
I generally just hammer on that.
And so you're much more precise, I think, with your style of debate. You'll hone in on the argument directly.
Yeah, I don't tweet all that much.
Yeah. Well, that's how it goes. But when you do, it generally tends to be poignant. I tend to go a little bit more engaging with them.
Yeah, that's fine.
And
I think this format of our conversations on YouTube is also kind of a function of how you like to do things too. Yeah,
well, I think it's a function of how our two sort of styles of going about things end up working well together. I like.
Yeah, that's true.
How it works together.
You have more of the social angle, and I have more of the explanatory angle.
Yeah.
They just overlap here.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah, that is good.
But I do want to get into induction.
Yeah. So one of the flaws why this is not only why this is a trap. We've kind of explained why it's a trap in an argument, but there's a bigger trap in just the way that they think about it, because a lot of people will think that evidence will lead them to some form of truth, but the problem is a problem of induction. If you have only facts, you cannot string them together in any way that makes those facts coherent without, you can't present an argument from facts without interpreting the facts. You always have to say, I have this fact, and this fact, so therefore, this thing is true. But no matter how many facts you string together, the thing that you suppose won't always be true.
Well, your explanation of the facts is always going to glue the facts together.
Right.
Using, logical relationships that may or may not be facts. They might actually just be guesses.
Yes.
And that's fine, too. They might be factual guesses, which is interesting.
I'm trying to describe the problem of induction. Is that a decent definition of the problem?
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, so we could go back to what is induction? In general, induction tries to claim that you can infer the future from the past, from what's not seen from the seen, the particular from the general, and so on, or vice versa. And in reality, this just can't be done. These things aren't. It's just not true. The future doesn't resemble the past in many, many ways. There might be some regularities, patterns that hold true over the timeline, and you can speak to those, and it looks similar. So you can say that the future does resemble the past in this way, but that isn't some general purpose rule that says that can be done. The only way you would really pick up on those patterns at all would be because you have an explanation of what's going on.
Right, and that explanation...
And an explanation of those regularities.
And that explanation is ultimately going to be flawed in some way, because there's no way for those facts, the explanation... You can interpret a fact to be anything, but that interpretation isn't necessarily going to be true, right?
Yeah, it's important to not confuse the idea of the fact with the fact itself.
Yes.
Typically, like, what you're doing is you're modeling things, so you don't want to confuse the model with what the model presents.
Yes.
So a lot of people will say, oh, well, we've proven this particular fact, so they're one and the same. But in reality, ideas are always guesses, always proposed as guesses. The fact might be an objective truth, but you get into the trickiness of when you try to explain that fact, you might actually have just a bad description, or a description that's okay but can be improved. And so just saying, well, I'm explaining a fact here, doesn't give your bad description of that fact a pass. Like, right. You should expect that there's better ways to describe those facts, and just go from there. The process of induction kind of pins you to your preconceptions of those facts anyway.
Yes.
So,
and this is that problem is why these people who are asking for evidence are asking for evidence, is because they intuit, or they know that any evidence you provide, they have to interpret, and they can interpret it to be any way they want it to be, right?
Way too easy to spin, and way too easy to say that's not evidence.
Yep.
Or to turn it around and say you're ignoring evidence.
Yes.
Look what you're doing. You're not seeing this thing, and so it's possible to have a view of the evidence in such a way that you know that evidence was false, like it was planted, or something was wrong, or maybe there was a problem with the information.
This happens in studies all the time. There's a lot of sociological research that has a lot of problems in the methodology and the way that it's being conducted.
Yeah. People like to treat evidence as a foundation, but it just isn't. It just is very unreliable, way more unreliable than people want it to be. It stems from the Enlightenment, I think, is because they were using evidence as a way to rebel against authority.
Yes.
Knowledge authorities.
Knowledge authorities at the time were a lot of sort of cobbled together rules of thumb, and, sort of not like, we do this because it's always been done, and that's just the way it's been done, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And those authorities would make claims on the basis of how politically convenient they were.
Yep.
And a lot of these claims would just be false, and so the breakout of science was really it was necessary to confront that, and the rebellion was in general a good thing, but they left us with some baggage.
Well, it's more like, I get the impression that a good portion of the people during the Enlightenment understood this problem. It's just over time, some of that's been lost. The debate on that has died down for whatever reason. I think I might want to blame a little bit of Bayesian statistics, right? Standard deviation and that sort of shit, where they get a sense of certainty about what they're saying. But that's just an abstraction, ultimately, that even if it's, within a standard deviation of 99 whatever percent, even that's pretty bad in Bayesian standards. But whatever, the standard deviation stuff, all that tells you is that it's happening and doesn't tell you why. It doesn't give you any interpretation of why that's happening.
Well, in Bayesian reasoning, they're just trying to improve their guesses with learnings over time.
Yeah.
And they're trying to do it in a programmatical way.
Yeah.
But in reality, like, what we should be doing is creatively explaining our learnings.
Right.
Like, the things we learn might cause us to do a 180 on what we think about the world.
And that would be good, because then we'd be closer to a better explanation, right?
Right, yeah.
And
yeah. So I mean, and it goes back to Karl Popper again. I think I just want to give a shout out, just because
we're fanboys.
Yeah, well, he should be famous for showing that induction as a process doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that the problem of induction is actually solved. Like, Popper solved the problem of induction by demonstrating that.
And how did he do that?
So for him, he just replaced it with trial and error correction. And so, it means recognition that knowledge is made of guesses.
Yeah. And
we are fallible about the information we're working with, and that's really important. It is important, crucially important. For us to be potentially wrong, I want to say this. It's really important that we need to be possibly wrong about things, because if it was impossible to be potentially wrong, we could not have knowledge. We could not learn anything. We could not get better, because there would be nothing to improve. It's really important to be able to work with ideas that are speculative and be comfortable with guesswork.
So let's just state that with a little bit, in simpler language, the problem of induction, meaning that you can't string together a bunch of facts and suppose that what you've come up with from those facts is true, right?
You can't derive
truth from
an explanation of those facts from the facts. Yeah. There's no logical deduction from that. so they'd like to say that that's inductive inference.
Yeah. So you can't come up with you can't come up with an argument from just facts. There's no way that argument will
because
always be true.
Because you always have to have a guess.
Yeah.
You always have to have a guess that relates those facts.
And
then you use logical deduction, to find problems with that guess.
Yes.
Contradictions.
Yeah. So
and when you find problems, then you have basically a problematic theory.
Right.
You look for another one.
And that is the trial and error correction that you're talking about. So you have a bunch of facts, and you look at them and you create a guess about what's going on. And you know that's a guess. And it might be your best guess, and you put that out there, and you look for whether or not there's contradictory things, if there's facts that come in, new facts emerge that show that it's wrong, right? All those sorts of things.
Yeah, everything. Keep things on the table, or don't be afraid to revisit things as well, because you often need the whole thing. You need your whole body of knowledge, and you can't have afforded to dismiss something using an old theory.
Yeah.
An old theory might have said this is something you could ignore, and so you might dismiss it then. But if you realize your theory was wrong, you got to put it back on the table.
Yeah, that's
what I mean?
That's a hard thing to do.
Think through all these scenarios.
And that's a hard thing to do mentally, because you feel like you've already dismissed that. But it's always good to reaffirm, to reassess your theories, where you sit, right, and what you have learned. Oh. Anyway, I feel like that's a pretty good stopping point.
Sure.
All right.
Good place to stop.
Yeah. So we are the Epistemologers. Please like and comment and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.